Computational creativity has many, many definitions, but for the purpose of this presentation, we're going to define it as three things. The information that you create creatively has to be new, useful, and non-trivial. Non-trivial is the hard part. What we mean by non-trivial is it's not simple induction or deduction or logical reasoning. You can't just say x implies y and I have x and therefore y. This is simple logical reasoning that we can already do, and it doesn't create the kind of results that we consider creative. And so this is very hard. Good old-fashioned AI has logic-oriented reasoning, which is deduction and inference, and this produces the trivial results that we were talking about. This is basically mathematical. You have very simple rules that govern how you're going to learn, and you apply the rules over and over again until you learn all you can learn. Programs are basically a long list of instructions. They're code that's been compiled that runs, and you get the same result every time you run the same code with the same input. And this is kind of counterintuitive to what creativity is, because we're trying to find a formula that will give us creative results every time. So there are many theories regarding the essence of creativity. Many people have come up with different ways of measuring creativity or measuring how they're going to make something creative or what makes things creative. So the first theory is called by association, a term coined by Arthur Koestler, and it describes combining ideas outside of the given domain with the problem that you're working on. Which means you're working in a kind of mental space to solve a problem. And when you find a creative solution, you reach out of that mental space, outside the box, so to speak, and apply other ideas, other thoughts, other knowledge to what you're working on now. Mark Turner and Giles Fosnier coined the term mental metaphors, which you can think of in terms of Dr. House. Dr. House is always solving some incredibly intense medical mystery, and he comes up with a clever metaphor to describe what's going on in the medical case.
What did the angio tell us?
Appears to be some clotting, possibly around the circle of Willis. Based on the progression of symptoms, the clot is growing. We need to cut
Saying
into...
that there appears to be clotting is like saying there's a traffic jam ahead. Is it a 10-car pileup or just a really slow bus in the center lane? If it is a bus, is it a thrombotic bus or an embolic bus? I think I pushed that metaphor too far.
This is seen as a sort of genius, and if we can get machines to do the same thing, to think in the same way, we can create computational creativity. Ironically enough, if you could combine the two completely independent domains of machines and intelligence, you get artificial intelligence. The second theory regarding creativity has to do with these things called conceptual spaces. It was coined by Margaret Bowden and centers around transcending constraints. Think of it in terms of scope. Let me give an example. If I misplaced a horseshoe in a haystack and I wanted to find it, and me and my friend Deep Blue needed to find this horseshoe, how would we go about finding it? Deep Blue, being a famous artificial intelligence, would start looking at the top of the haystack and go all the way to the bottom. This is an example of classic search. You start at one end and you search to the other. You're going to find the horseshoe eventually, but it's going to take you a long time. Me, being the creative human that I am, I'm just going to take a box of matches, and I'm going to burn the haystack down. Eventually, I'm going to find the horseshoe, because I don't care about the haystack. So, I did much less work finding this horseshoe than Deep Blue did. I found a creative solution to a pretty simple problem. But how did I do this? I went outside of my box and found a solution that was not within my domain. Another form of creativity is called compression and expansion. I stumbled upon these terms while watching conference proceedings from the Long Now Foundation between Will Wright and Brian Eno. So compression is basically distillation. It's rule formation. Think about watching an apple fall 1,000 times from a tree. After a while, you're going to get an idea of what gravity is. That's conceptualization. It means you watch something happen over and over again, and you form a very small rule set to govern a very wide range of happenings. Expansion is the exact opposite. Expansion means you take a very small set of rules and create very complex events centered around those rules. Think about physics. Physics is governed by a very finite set of laws and forces that generate the world around us. It's probably one of the most complex examples of expansion you can run across. You can also view this in terms of layers of abstraction, or scope. The relationship between these very simple rules can become more and more complex, and each added complexity is a new layer of abstraction. The last method of simulating creativity is called entropic-based learning. This comes from good old-fashioned AI. When you have a problem, randomly take steps in every direction until you converge on a solution. This is mathematically provable, but this seems less than optimal. It's a lot like monkeys with typewriters. You'll eventually get it right, but it's going to take a long time. One example of computational creativity is known as the new term problem. Consider this. If you have a computer that knows what a circle and a square is, and you give it a triangle, how does the computer know that it's a new shape? This appears a lot when we're trying to teach machines how to play classic games like checkers, chess, and reverse-eye. It appears specifically in the goodness function, where a computer is making a decision comparing two different moves, trying to figure out which one's better. A machine figuring out that a queen is better than a pawn is an example of the new term problem. Go, however, is a different story altogether. Go is a completely different game when it comes to computational creativity than checkers, chess, or reverse-eye. Go uses a very small set of rules to create very complex gameplay. Remember, this is called expansion. The very small rule set allows for so many different things to happen across all the different games of Go. It makes it impossible to look into the future and try and see every combination of every possible move. Another example of computational creativity is language recognition. Now, I'm not talking about speech recognition. I'm talking about meaning recognition, analysis of depth, parallel, all the things you did in your freshman English classes. Boris was a program to analyze narratives and to come up with information about them. In a sense, it's kind of language recognition, but it lacked the creative interpretation that we're really trying to embed in machines. Computational creativity can also manifest in language generation, which is a different side of the same coin. There are many levels in which this creativity can appear. Think on a very low level, in the grammar, with puns, metaphor, and alliteration, or in the plot, with drama, action, twists, climax, or even at a very high level, in the author's tone, diction, and rhythm. Minstrel was a program designed to procedurally generate fictional narratives, and it met with some success, but in the end, the narratives it made were shallow and a little discontinuous. It lacked the creativity to understand the concepts that made up its own story. So, in summary, computational creativity is pretty hard. As you've seen, we've come up with several theories about how to make machines creative, but we haven't found a way to impart this knowledge to the computers. With this in mind, what kind of creative conclusion does the computer come to in this clip from the movie War Games?
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play. How about a nice game of chess?